My name is Leo, and I need to tell you about the night that changed everything. The night that proved to me that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest miracles. It was February 14th, 2023, Valentine's Day. While couples across Chicago were sharing warm dinners and exchanging gifts, I was huddled under the Wabash Avenue Bridge, my entire world contained in a single torn backpack and whatever warmth I could steal from the city's forgotten corners. I was 17 years old, and I had been living on the streets for 8 months. 8 months of sleeping in doorways, 8 months of digging through garbage cans for scraps, 8 months of being invisible to a world that seemed to have forgotten that people like me even existed. The system had failed me when my foster family decided they could not handle my behavioral issues anymore. One day I had a bed. The next day I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a crushing realization that I was completely alone. But that night, that freezing February night, I had something that felt like treasure to me. Something that represented hope in a world that had shown me nothing but coldness. I had a pair of thick, warm wool socks. They were not just any socks. They were beautiful, soft, and incredibly warm. A volunteer at the Salvation Army shelter had given them to me 2 weeks earlier when I had shown up with feet so frostbitten that my toes had turned an alarming shade of purple. The volunteer, an older woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, had taken one look at my feet and immediately went to find the warmest socks she could locate. "These are special," she had told me, pressing them into my hands. They were donated by someone who specifically wanted them to go to someone who really needed them. "Take care of them, honey. Take care of yourself." Those socks had become my lifeline. They were the difference between being able to walk and having to crawl. They were the difference between maintaining what little dignity I had left and surrendering completely to the brutal reality of homelessness. Every morning when I put them on, I felt like I could face another day. Every night when I took them off, I held them close to my chest and whispered a prayer of gratitude. The temperature that night had dropped to -15 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that cuts through your bones and settles into your soul, the kind of cold that makes you wonder if you will wake up the next morning. I had wrapped myself in every piece of clothing I owned, but still, the cold was winning. My fingers were numb, my lips were blue, and my breath came out in short, desperate puffs of white steam. I was trying to fall asleep, pressing myself against the concrete pillar of the bridge, hoping that somehow I could generate enough body heat to survive until morning, when I heard something that made my blood freeze even colder than it already was. Across the street, barely visible through the swirling snow, I saw a figure slumped against a garbage bin. At first, I thought it might be another homeless person like me, someone else trying to find shelter from the merciless winter. But as I squinted through the darkness, I realized this was something far more serious. The figure was not moving. Not at all. I forced myself to stand up, my legs shaking from both cold and fear. Every instinct in my body told me to stay put, to conserve my energy, to focus on my own survival. When you are living on the streets, you learn quickly that you cannot save everyone. You learn that sometimes helping others means putting yourself at risk. You learn that survival often requires a certain level of selfishness. But something about that motionless figure called to me, something that I could not ignore. I grabbed my backpack and crossed the empty street, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of the winter night. As I got closer, I could see that it was a man, probably in his 60s, wearing nothing but a thin jacket and pants that looked like they had not been washed in weeks. His feet were completely bare, and they were a terrifying shade of blue that I recognized from my own experience with frostbite. He was conscious, but barely. His eyes were open, but they had that glassy, unfocused look that I had seen in the eyes of people who were very close to giving up. His breathing was shallow and labored, and when he tried to speak, only a weak whisper came out. "Help," he managed to say, the word barely audible above the howling wind. I knelt down beside him, and the full reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. This man was dying. He was literally freezing to death right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to save him. I had no money, No phone to call for help. No warm place to take him. I was just another homeless kid with nothing to offer. But then I looked down at my feet, and I saw my socks. My beautiful, warm, life-saving socks. The thought hit me like lightning. I could give him my socks. They would not solve all of his problems, but they might buy him some time. They might keep his feet from freezing completely. They might be the difference between life and death. But if I gave him my socks, what would happen to me? How would I survive the rest of winter with nothing to protect my feet? How would I walk to the soup kitchens, to the shelters, to the places where I might find help? How would I keep going when I had already given away the one thing that was keeping me alive? I sat there in the snow, staring at this dying man, and I faced the hardest decision of my life. I could save myself, or I could try to save him. I could not do both. Time seemed to stop as I knelt there in the snow, my mind racing through all the possible outcomes. I thought about all the times people had walked past me when I was begging for help, all the times I had been treated like I was invisible, all the times the world had shown me that nobody cared whether I lived or died. I thought about my mother, who had died when I was 12, leaving me alone in a world that seemed designed to crush people like me. I thought about my father, who had never been in the picture, who had abandoned me before I was even born. I thought about the foster families who had given up on me, the social workers who had written me off, the teachers who had stopped believing in me. But then I thought about something else. I thought about the volunteer at the shelter who had given me these socks. I thought about the way she had looked at me, not with pity or disgust, but with genuine compassion. I thought about the way she had called me honey and told me to take care of myself. I thought about how, for just a moment, she had made me feel like I mattered, and I realized that this was my chance to be that person for someone else. This was my chance to show the world that even someone with nothing could still give everything. This was my chance to prove that kindness was not about how much you had, but about how much you were willing to share. Without another moment of hesitation, I pulled off my boots and peeled off my precious socks. The cold air hit my feet like 1,000 needles, but I did not care. I gently lifted the man's feet and slid the socks onto them, being careful not to hurt his frostbitten skin. The moment the socks touched his feet, something changed in his eyes. The glassy, unfocused look disappeared, replaced by something that looked like hope. He looked up at me, and I saw tears beginning to form in the corners of his eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" I did not have a good answer for him. I did not have some profound philosophy about helping others, or some religious conviction that compelled me to sacrifice for strangers. All I knew was that it felt right. All I knew was that in that moment, helping him felt more important than helping myself. "Because everyone deserves to be warm," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "Because no one should have to die alone in the cold." He reached out with a shaking hand and grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak, but his intention was clear. He was trying to thank me, trying to express something that words could not capture. "What is your name?" he asked. "Leo," I told him. "My name is Leo." He nodded, as if he was committing that name to memory. "I am going to remember you, Leo. I am going to remember what you did for me." I helped him to his feet, and we stood there for a moment in the swirling snow, two broken people who had found something beautiful in the midst of their brokenness. Then I picked up my backpack, put my boots back on my bare feet, and walked away. I did not look back. I did not wait to see what would happen to him. I just walked back to my spot under the bridge and tried to figure out how I was going to survive the rest of the winter. The next few days were the hardest of my life. Without my socks, my feet became a constant source of agony. Every step was painful. Every moment was a struggle. I developed new frostbite almost immediately, and walking became so difficult that I could barely make it to the soup kitchens that were keeping me alive. But something strange happened during those painful days. Every time I wanted to give up, every time I questioned whether I had made the right decision, I would think about that man's eyes. I would remember the way he had looked at me with such gratitude, such disbelief that someone like me would sacrifice for someone like him. And somehow, that memory gave me the strength to keep going. I did not know it at the time, But my act of kindness was about to set off a chain reaction that would change not just my life, but the lives of thousands of people across the country. 2 days after I gave away my socks, the man I had helped, whose name I would later learn was Roberto Ramos, managed to make his way to the Sacred Heart Community Center on the south side of Chicago. He was still wearing my socks, and he was still alive, which was more than anyone had expected given the condition he had been in. Mr. Ramos told a story to anyone who would listen. He told them about the 17-year-old boy who had given away his only pair of warm socks to a dying stranger. He told them about how that act of kindness had saved his life. He told them about how he had never experienced anything like it in his 63 years on Earth. One of the volunteers at the community center, a young woman named Sarah Martinez, was so moved by his story that she decided to share it on social media. She took a photo of Mr. Ramos wearing my socks and posted it on Facebook with a caption that read, "This man was saved by a homeless teenager who gave him his only pair of warm socks. If a kid with nothing can give everything, what excuse do the rest of us have? Hashtag SockAngel, hashtag Kindness Matters, hashtag Chicago Strong." The post was shared 17 times in the first hour. By the end of the day, it had been shared over 1,000 times. By the end of the week, it had been shared over 50,000 times. Local news stations picked up the story. National news outlets followed. Suddenly, everyone in Chicago, and eventually everyone in America, was talking about the Sock Angel, the mysterious homeless teenager who had performed an act of kindness so pure and selfless that it restored people's faith in humanity. But here's the thing about viral stories. They often take on a life of their own, and the truth can get lost in the telling. Some versions of the story claimed that I had given away my shoes. Others claimed that I had given away my coat. Some claimed that I was older. Others claimed that I was younger. The details kept changing, but the core message remained the same. A homeless kid had given away his most precious possession to save a stranger's life. 3,000 miles away, in a luxury high-rise apartment in Manhattan, a woman named Claire Whitman was scrolling through her social media feed late one night when she came across Sarah's post about the Sock Angel. Claire was the CEO of Whitman Industries, a global fashion company that specialized in luxury winter wear. She was worth over $200 million, lived in a penthouse apartment, and had never wanted for anything in her adult life. But as she read the story of the homeless teenager who had given away his socks, Claire felt something she had not felt in years. She felt a deep, profound connection to a story that seemed to reach directly into her soul and remind her of something she had spent decades trying to forget. You see, Claire had not always been wealthy. In fact, there had been a time in her life when she had been exactly like me, homeless, desperate, and completely alone. It was 35 years earlier, when Claire was just 22 years old. She had graduated from college with a degree in fashion design and moved to New York City with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and a bank account that contained exactly $347. She had been confident that she would find a job quickly, that her talent and determination would be enough to open doors for her. She had been wrong. For 6 months, Claire had lived in her car, showering at the YMCA, eating one meal a day, and slowly watching her dreams crumble around her. She had applied for hundreds of jobs and been rejected by every single one. She had been too proud to ask her family for help, too stubborn to admit that she had made a mistake by coming to the city. The winter of 1988 had been particularly brutal, and there had been nights when Claire had been certain she was going to freeze to death in her car. She remembered the feeling of being invisible, of being treated like she did not matter, of being forgotten by a world that seemed to have no place for people like her. But then, one night in December, something had happened that changed everything. Claire had been sitting in her car, crying from hunger and cold, when an elderly homeless man had knocked on her window. She had been terrified at first, but when she rolled down the window, the man had handed her a pair of thick wool socks. "You look cold, sweetheart," he had said. "These might help." Those socks had quite literally saved Claire's life. They had kept her feet warm enough to survive the winter, and more importantly, they had reminded her that kindness could exist even in the darkest places. That random act of generosity from a stranger had given her the strength to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing that things could get better. And they had gotten better. A week after receiving those socks, Claire had finally landed a job at a small fashion house. It was not much, just an entry-level position that paid minimum wage, but it was enough to get her off the streets and back on her feet. From there, she had worked her way up, eventually starting her own company and building it into the empire it was today. But she had never forgotten those socks. She had never forgotten the man who had given them to her. And she had never forgotten the lesson he had taught her about the power of kindness. Reading about the sock angel brought all of those memories flooding back. And Claire knew immediately that she had to do something. She could not let this story fade away, like so many viral moments do. She could not let my act of kindness be just another feel-good story that people shared on social media for a few days before moving on to the next thing. She wanted to create something lasting, something that would honor not just my sacrifice, but the sacrifice of every person who had ever given what little they had to help someone else. That night, Claire called an emergency meeting with her executive team. She told them about the sock angel story, and she told them about her own experience with homelessness. Many of her employees had no idea about her past. She had kept it private for decades, afraid that it would somehow diminish her credibility as a business leader. But that night, she decided to be vulnerable. She decided to share her story because she knew that vulnerability was the key to creating real change. "I want to launch a new initiative," she told her team. "I want to call it One Warm Step, and I want it to be the biggest charitable campaign our company has ever undertaken." The idea was simple but powerful. Whitman Industries would partner with homeless shelters across the country to provide high-quality winter gear, socks, gloves, hats, scarves, and coats to people who needed them most. But these would not be cheap, low-quality items that companies often donated to make themselves feel better. These would be the same high-end products that Whitman Industries sold in luxury department stores. More importantly, every single item would carry a special symbol, a small heart with the letters LEO stitched inside. It would be a way to honor the mysterious sock angel who had started it all, and a reminder to everyone who received these items that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Claire's team was initially skeptical. This was a massive financial undertaking. They were talking about donating millions of dollars worth of merchandise. But Claire was determined, and her passion was infectious. Within a week, the entire company was on board. The campaign launched exactly 1 month after my story went viral. Claire held a press conference in Times Square, surrounded by boxes of winter gear that would be distributed to shelters across the country. She told the story of the sock angel, and she told her own story of homelessness and recovery. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other companies began reaching out, wanting to partner with Whitman Industries. Celebrities began endorsing the campaign. Politicians began talking about it. Within days, One Warm Step had become a national movement. But the most important response came from the people who needed help the most. Homeless shelters across the country began reporting that they had more resources than they had ever had before. People who had been forgotten by society were suddenly receiving beautiful, warm, high-quality items that made them feel like they mattered. As the One Warm Step campaign gained momentum, there was one question that everyone wanted answered. Who was the sock angel? Despite all the media attention, despite all the investigation by reporters and social media users, nobody had been able to find me. I was still living on the streets of Chicago, still struggling to survive, still completely unaware that my act of kindness had sparked a national movement. I had no idea that my name was being mentioned on television shows and in newspaper articles. I had no idea that thousands of people were looking for me. The closest anyone had come to finding me was Mr. Ramos, the man whose life I had saved. He had been working with the police and local social services to try to track me down, but I had become even more elusive since giving away my socks. The frostbite on my feet had made it difficult for me to walk long distances, so I had been staying in more hidden locations, places where the authorities were less likely to find me. Claire Whitman had hired a private investigator to search for me. She had put out a public plea. offering a substantial reward for information that would lead to finding the sock angel. She had even gone on national television to talk about how important it was to find me, not just to thank me, but to make sure I was safe. This young man gave everything he had to save a stranger. She said during an interview on Good Morning America, "The least we can do is make sure he has everything he needs to survive. We need to find him, and we need to help him." But I remained invisible, just another homeless person in a city full of people who had been forgotten by society. Chapter 8. The Night Everything Changed. It was March 15th, exactly 1 month after I had given away my socks, when everything changed. I was huddled in an abandoned building on the west side, trying to stay warm with nothing but a thin blanket and a pair of torn shoes that were falling apart. My feet were in terrible condition. The frostbite had gotten worse, and I was beginning to think that I might lose some of my toes. I was hungry, exhausted, and starting to wonder if I was going to make it through another night when I heard voices outside the building. At first, I thought it might be other homeless people looking for shelter, but as the voices got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was a group of volunteers from the Sacred Heart Community Center, the same place where Mr. Ramos had told a story. They were doing a sweep of the area, looking for homeless people who might need help, and they had thermal blankets and hot soup to distribute. I tried to hide deeper in the building, but one of the volunteers had seen me. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, and she approached me slowly, as if she was afraid I might run away. "Hi there," she said. "My name is Maria. We are from the Sacred Heart Community Center, and we are here to help. Are you hungry?" I was starving, but I was also terrified. I had learned not to trust adults, not to trust anyone who claimed they wanted to help me. Too many times, I had been let down by people who made promises they could not keep. But Maria was different. There was something about her that reminded me of the volunteer who had given me my socks. Something genuine and caring. "What is your name?" she asked as she handed me a container of hot soup. For a moment, I hesitated. I had been using fake names for months, trying to stay off the radar of social services and law enforcement. But something about Maria made me want to tell the truth. "Leo," I said quietly. "My name is Leo." The moment I said it, I saw something change in Maria's expression. Her eyes widened, and she looked at me with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "Leo," she repeated. "How old are you, Leo?" 17, I said, confused by her reaction. Maria turned to her fellow volunteers, and I could see them whispering to each other. One of them pulled out a cell phone and started making a call. I started to panic, thinking that they were calling the police or social services. "Please do not call anyone," I said, starting to back away. "I have not done anything wrong." No, Maria said quickly. "We are not calling to get you in trouble. We are calling because, Leo, I think you might be someone very special, someone a lot of people have been looking for." Chapter 9. The Revelation. What happened next was like something out of a movie. Within an hour, the abandoned building was surrounded by news vans and reporters. Mr. Ramos showed up, still wearing my socks, tears streaming down his face as he told everyone who would listen that I was the boy who had saved his life. Social workers arrived with emergency medical supplies to treat my frostbitten feet. Police officers came not to arrest me, but to protect me from the growing crowd of media and onlookers. And then, just as I was beginning to understand what was happening, a black limousine pulled up to the building. Claire Whitman stepped out of that limousine like an angel descending from heaven. She was wearing an expensive coat and designer shoes, but her eyes were filled with the same compassion I had seen in the volunteer who had given me my socks all those weeks ago. She walked straight up to me, knelt down so that we were at eye level, and looked directly into my eyes. "Leo," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you know how many people you have helped?" I shook my head. I had no idea what she was talking about. "Your act of kindness has created a movement," she continued. "Because of what you did, thousands of homeless people across the country now have warm clothes and hope. Because of what you did, people are remembering that kindness matters." She reached into her purse and pulled out a pair of socks. They were beautiful, thick and warm, just like the ones I had given away. But these socks had something special, a small heart with the letters LEO stitched on the inside. "These are for you," she said, "and there are thousands more just like them, all carrying your name, all given to people who need them because of what you did." I started to cry, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of gratitude and disbelief. I had spent so many months feeling invisible, feeling like I did not matter, feeling like the world would be better off without me. But now, this woman was telling me that my simple act of kindness had somehow changed the world. That night, I slept in a warm bed for the first time in 8 months. Claire had arranged for me to stay in a nearby hotel while social services worked to find me a more permanent solution. She had also arranged for me to receive medical treatment for my frostbite and to have a full physical examination to make sure I was healthy. But more importantly, she had given me something I had not had in a very long time: hope. Over the next few days, I learned the full extent of what my act of kindness had accomplished. The One Warm Step campaign had raised over $50 million for homeless services. Hundreds of companies had joined the initiative. Thousands of volunteers had signed up to help at shelters across the country. My story had been covered by every major news outlet in America. I had received letters from children who had been inspired by my story to donate their allowance to homeless shelters. I had received messages from adults who said that my story had reminded them of the importance of kindness and compassion. But the most meaningful response came from other homeless people. I received dozens of letters from people who said that my story had given them hope during their darkest moments. They told me that knowing someone like them could make a difference had helped them keep going when they wanted to give up. Claire did not just give me socks and a hotel room. She gave me a chance at a real future. She arranged for me to finish my high school education through a special program for at-risk youth. She set up a college fund that would allow me to pursue whatever career I wanted. She even offered me a job at her company, working with the One Warm Step initiative to help coordinate donations and outreach efforts. But most importantly, she treated me like I mattered. She listened to my story, she respected my opinions, and she made me feel like I was part of something important. 6 months after that night under the bridge, I found myself standing in front of a room full of business executives, politicians, and social activists at the annual One Warm Step Gala in New York City. Claire had asked me to speak about my experience, to share my story with people who had the power to make a real difference in the lives of homeless people across the country. I was nervous. I had never spoken to such an important audience before, but I knew that this was my chance to advocate for people who did not have a voice. "My name is Leo," I began, my voice shaking slightly. 6 months ago, I was a homeless teenager living under a bridge in Chicago. I was invisible, forgotten, and convinced that I did not matter. But then I met a man who was dying in the cold, and I made a decision that changed both of our lives. I told them about that night, about the choice I had made to give away my most precious possession to save a stranger. I told them about how that act of kindness had created a ripple effect that had touched thousands of lives. But more importantly, I told them about the people who were still living on the streets, still struggling to survive, still waiting for someone to show them that they mattered. There are thousands of kids just like me out there right now, I said. Kids who have been forgotten by the system. Kids who have been told they are not worth saving. Kids who are one act of kindness away from finding hope again. I challenged everyone in that room to think about what they could do to help. I challenged them to see homeless people not as problems to be solved, but as human beings who deserve dignity and respect. The speech was well received, but what happened afterward was even more meaningful. Person after person came up to me to share their own stories of homelessness, of struggles with poverty, of times when they had been helped by the kindness of strangers. I realized that night that my story was not unique. There were thousands of people who had been where I had been, who had faced the same challenges I had faced, who had found hope in the most unexpected places. Today, 2 years after that freezing February night, the One Warm Step initiative has become one of the largest charitable campaigns in American history. The campaign has distributed over 5 million items of winter clothing to homeless people across the country. It has funded the construction of 12 new shelters and the expansion of dozens of existing ones. But the impact goes far beyond the numbers. The campaign has changed the way people think about homelessness. It has shown people that homeless individuals are not just statistics or problems to be solved, but human beings with stories, with dignity, and with the capacity to make a difference in the world. Mr. Ramos, the man whose life I saved that night, now works as a volunteer coordinator at the Sacred Heart Community Center. He spent his days distributing socks and other winter gear to homeless people, and he tells my story to anyone who will listen. Every pair of socks he hands out carries that small heart with the letters Elio. Reminder that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. Claire Whitman has become like a mother to me. She helped me finish high school, and she is now helping me pursue a degree in social work. She has shown me that success is not just about what you achieve for yourself, but about what you do to help others. I still live modestly. I have a small apartment near the university I attend, and I work part-time for the One Warm Step initiative, helping to coordinate donations and outreach efforts. But I have everything I need, and more importantly, I have a purpose. As I write this story, I am sitting in my apartment, wearing a pair of thick wool socks with a small heart stitched inside. They are not the same socks I gave away that night. Those socks are still being worn by Mr. Ramos, and he says he will never take them off. But they are a reminder of something important, that even when you have nothing, you still have the power to change the world. I think about that night often, about the choice I made to give away my most precious possession to save a stranger. I think about how scared I was, how uncertain I was about whether I would survive the winter myself. But I also think about how that single act of kindness created a ripple effect that touched thousands of lives. I think about all the homeless people who now have warm clothes because of that night. I think about all the volunteers who have been inspired to help because of that story. I think about all the children who have learned about the importance of kindness because of what happened. Most importantly, I think about Mr. Ramos, who is alive today because of a decision I made in the darkest moment of my life. He has grandchildren who know their grandfather because of those socks. He has years of life ahead of him because of that moment of compassion. People often ask me if I regret giving away my socks that night. They ask me if I would make the same choice again, knowing how much I would suffer afterward. The answer is simple: absolutely. Because I learned that night that the most powerful force in the world is not money or fame or success. The most powerful force in the world is kindness. And kindness does not require wealth or status or power. It only requires a willingness to put someone else's needs before your own. That night under the bridge, I was just a homeless teenager with nothing to offer the world. But I had something more valuable than money or possessions. I had compassion. And compassion, it turns out, is the one thing that can change everything. The Sock Angel story is not really about me. It is about the power that each of us has to make a difference in the world, no matter how small or insignificant we might feel. It is about the ripple effect that occurs when one person chooses kindness over selfishness, when one person decides that helping others is more important than helping themselves. I am no longer homeless. I am no longer invisible. But I will never forget what it felt like to be forgotten by the world. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that other people do not have to feel that way. Because everyone deserves to be warm. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to know that they matter. That is the lesson I learned that freezing February night. And that is the lesson I want to share with the world. That the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest miracles. And sometimes, all it takes is a pair of socks.